Welcome, everyone. It's 2 o'clock on Friday and the last day of our convention. So for our last session today, before we dance tonight, we're going to have a session on change the culture, change the world. Doesn't that sound pretty exciting? So yesterday, if you were here for the supported decision session, you met Jonathan Martinez, if you didn't already know him. And Jonathan is a disability rights attorney. He worked in Virginia for many years and is well known for his work on the Jenny Hatch case. Now he's the Senior Director for Law and Policy at the Burton Blatt Institute at Syracuse University. So, Jonathan, we're ready for you to take it away.
Thank you so much, Lucy. I still work in Virginia, and I'm proud when I do. In fact, I'm talking to you right now from Virginia. I want to thank everyone for joining today. I know it's the last session, so thank you for hanging in with me. Yesterday, we talked about supported decision-making and the way it can increase people's self-determination and improve their quality of life. Today, I want to talk to you about ways we can use supported decision-making to help in specific areas. So let's begin, because we're going to fly through several topics that I often take a full day to talk about. So let's talk about, first and foremost, what we all want from our lives, because all of us want the same thing. It doesn't matter if you're a teenager or an adult, if you have disabilities or you don't. Every single person wants the same thing. We all want to live the type of lives we want to live. We want to have a lifetime of opportunity and happiness to do the things we want to do, to have the jobs we want to have, to create long-term meaningful relationships and opportunities. In other words, what we all want is to be self-determined. We all want to have the type of lives where we are the ones that choose what we do, where we go, where we work, who we spend time with. What we know, as I told you yesterday, is we have years and years and studies that show that when people with disabilities are more self-determined, when they make more choices, when they have more control over their lives, they have better lives. They are found repeatedly to be more likely to be employed, independent, part of their community, healthier and safer. So the question we always have is, how can we get to self-determination? How can we be the ones that make those decisions? And yesterday we talked about supported decision-making, which is a thing that we all do. That supported decision-making is just getting the help we all need to do the things we all need to do. All of us use supported decision-making in some way every day, whether we are asking a doctor to explain things in plain English, whether we are asking a coworker for advice on how to handle a situation, whether we're asking a friend or a family member about a relationship issue. And again, what we know from studies coming in is that people who use supported decision-making to make their own decisions instead of having a guardian make decisions for them are more likely to be self-determined. And as I said, that's not rocket science. If you're making your own decisions, you have more control over your life. And we know when people have more control over their lives are better. So if you feel that you're self-determined, if you feel that you're living a life of meaning and opportunity, ask yourself a question. How'd you get there? Did you do it yourself? Or were there people in your lives? Were there organizations? I am sure that every single person on this call can point to someone in their life who made a difference. A teacher, a counselor, a friend, a family member, someone who put you on the path you wanted to be on, someone you could depend upon to be an ally, a friend, or a mentor. But that's where things get hard for people with disabilities, because like we said yesterday, even though we all have the same experiences, even though we all have the same needs, people with disabilities are looked at differently by society. From 1500 years ago, the first time we wrote the laws down, we were telling people with disabilities they had less rights than everyone else. And the same is true about the systems we face. I mean, if you don't have disabilities, I can tell you something. You're part of a system, you don't even know you're part of it. Because people without disabilities, the system is set up for them. It's like a linear progression, an orderly progression from school to work to retirement and healthcare. All the things that people need are kind of lined up for them. You know, we have guidance counselors, we have mentors, we have opportunities. On the other hand, what I hear from people with disabilities and their families, and I hear this in every state I go to around the country, is the same thing over and over and over. People with disabilities are sent to one person or one area to talk about school, someone else to talk about education, someone else to talk about employment, someone else to talk about healthcare, someone else to talk about money management. And the problem is those someone else's don't know each other. So what could happen is one person you speak with may give you different information about than someone else you speak with. One person you talk to may not like the other person you talk to. They may be having territorial competitions. And what happens to people with disabilities time and time and time again is they spend so much time trying to find out who can help them and how they can get help. They never have an opportunity to set that help up. And that, more than anything else, in my opinion, is what leads to society's opinions about people with disabilities. Not that people with disabilities can't do things, but they don't get a chance to do things. They don't get a chance to work with the right people because the system is in what we call silos. The education system is in a silo and they only work with each other. The employment system is in a silo and only talks with each other. Person-centered planning is in a silo and doesn't talk to anyone. As a result, you're getting sometimes redundant, sometimes conflicting, sometimes wildly divergent advice and supports and services. How can a person succeed? How can a person get what he or she needs to be independent if the very agencies and organizations and people that are supposed to be helping them become more independent and successful aren't themselves working together? As one expert called it, it is a fragmented system that contributes to the failure to prepare people with disabilities for the future. I mean, think about it this way. I'm going to show you this from the law itself, but we all know this, that the education, the employment system, vocational rehabilitation, Medicaid waivers, all these types of supports and services are all essentially supposed to address the same thing. You will see in their laws, because I'm going to show it to you, these agencies, these organizations are all supposed to address education, employment, independent living, and healthcare. And the question I have is, if all these entities are supposed to do the same thing, why are they in silos? Why aren't they working together? Why are we trying to get education, employment, and independent living services from schools, while we're also trying to get education, employment, and independent living services from vocational rehabilitation or a Medicaid waiver? Isn't that a waste of time? Isn't that a waste of effort? And if you are a provider, isn't that a waste of money? So we need to change that system. We need to find a way to make sure that entities that are supposed to work together and that should work together do work together. And what we've called that, because you have to put labels on jars, is the culture of coordinated support. To change our culture of silos, to change our culture of separation, and work on coordination and collaboration so that people finally get what they need to be educated, employed, and live independently. This is what I'm talking about. It's how it looks on your screen. Funny story, this picture you see on your screen, which is a person with disabilities surrounded by people who support her and surrounded by the ideals they should be trying to reach. I was giving this lecture in an Ohio conference, and a gentleman walked up to me and said, "I'm a visual learner," handed me this picture and said, "Is this what you're talking about?" And I said, "Oh my God, yes it is. If you'll hand that to me, I'm gonna steal it." And I did. So this is what the culture of coordinated support looks like and how it should work. Notice the person is in the center, exactly where she should be. People with disabilities should be at the center of their plan, driving their plans. Now look at who's around her. Her family, the education system, employment system, perhaps a waiver provider. Around her is her support system. And look what's happening. The arrows are going to her and away from her. So those various supporters are getting information from her, and she's giving information to them. That's exactly what should happen. But notice what else is happening. They're talking to each other. There's arrows between the supporters. They're sharing information about her. To put another way, why do we have 3 meetings? Why do we have an independent education program meeting, an employment individualized plan for employment meeting, and a Medicaid waiver individualized service plan meeting? Why do we have 3 meetings to discuss the same things about the same person? Here, they're working together. They're talking with each other. They're sharing information between each other with her permission, talking about what she needs and what she wants and how they can work together to get it there. When we do that, what happens is the agencies work together, they communicate together, they cooperate with each other, they work more efficiently, and they work from a shared vision. Instead of having 3 entities, for example, with 3 plans, with 9 goals about education, employment, and independent living that may or may not match up, that may in fact contradict each other, shouldn't we have one larger plan with the same goals and the same objectives? If we're working together in that way, the only question then is not what she needs, but who's going to provide it. Because everybody should be working together to develop what she needs. And opportunities for this are all around us. I'm going to show you now how these plans, these supports and services not only can work together, they should work together. And I'm going to show you how they have already worked together in a successful pilot project in 2 separate states. So let's start with the education system. Here's something that we know. We know from studies that students who leave school with more self-determination, students who are making more decisions as they get out of school, are going to be more likely to be successful adults. So schools that enhance people with disabilities' self-determination, who give them opportunities to make decisions, those students are going to do better in their lives. They're going to be more likely to be educated after school, college, etc. They're going to be more likely to be employed. They're going to be more likely to make more money, and they're going to be more likely to live independently. So how do we get to self-determination? Well, what we know from the Supreme Court is a case up on your screen right now. Supreme Court said that schools have to make sure that students receive educational benefits. Well, what's an educational benefit? The law tells us that. On your screen is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA, the very first section of IDEA, which tells us what the whole point of that law is. Look at the bold language on your screen. It says the whole point of special education, the whole point of what schools are supposed to do with students with disabilities is to prepare them for further future education, employment, and independent living. Yes, independent living is an obligation of schools. Schools must, from kindergarten all the way through graduation, be preparing students with disabilities for independent living. So what we know from studies, and the ones on your screen are all supported by the United States Department of Education, is that the point of special education is self-determination. And that schools should be focusing on self-determination. They should be focusing on giving students opportunities to make decisions and be self-determined. Unfortunately, we know that's not happening. Study after study, and I've got one on your screen that I was a part of, have found that the #1 referral source for guardianship is a school. I hear from parents across the country, the school told me to get guardianship, or the school told me when your child turns 18, you have to get guardianship. Well, that's what we have to change, because that attitude is incorrect, by the way. It goes against the law, which talks about independent living. Yes, there are some students who may need guardianship when they graduate or when they turn 18. But I will tell you this, what the law and what best practices show is why are we rushing toward it? So what we should be doing to comply with IDEA, what we can do as advocates, what we can do as family members is insist that schools do what they're supposed to do. which is teach self-determination. You can ask that question at an IEP meeting. What is your policy on self-determination goals? They may not have one. One study showed that less than a third of schools had self-determination goals as part of their program. So we as advocates and family members should be saying to the school, I want goals in my student's IEP that is going to lead to them being more self-determined. And that's not hard to do. The United States Department of Education recommends doing things called I statements. I mean, think about the goals you've seen in IEPs. There are so many what I call boring goals. Things that say like, the student shall use proper grammar 75% of the time. So what? What happens if you don't use proper grammar? What happens if you use ain't? What happens is you failed. Does that help you grow at all? Does that help you develop your skills? So an I statement for that goal helps the student develop and become more self-determined. Here's an example. I will work with my teacher to choose stories that I want to write, and I will write those stories using proper grammar 75% of the time. Look what that goal does. I, the student, has to take responsibility. Will work with my teacher. The student must work and get support in making those decisions. And choose, I will be self-determined and write stories and have proper grammar. Or instead of the student will not be tardy, I will work with my family, my counselor, my teacher to develop a method, a plan to help me get to class on time. What happens if you're late? It means maybe you need to develop a new plan. You need to be self-determined. You need to get support. Those types of I statements, again, recommended by the federal government, build self-determination in ways that old goals cannot. And what we know is that when we have goals that are focused on building self-determination, students become more self-determined. They do better in school. They do better outside of school. They are better as adults at performing tasks like work and independent living. So why shouldn't we do that? We should be advocating for the schools to do exactly what they should. And how do we get there? We get there through the IEP process. Now, lots of people have told me that when they go to IEPs, it's lots of people talking at them or talking at a student. Some people tell me that the school even says, don't bring the student to the IEP. I tell people I work with, your student should be at that IEP from the very first day. Your student, whether they're 3 years old or 4, whether they don't get it or not, they should be told this is your team. This is your education and should be a part of every IEP. And if they can't stay the whole time, if they don't want to stay the whole time, that's fine. But the goal, again, from the US Department of Education, is to set up a system where the student is the leader of the meeting. So the student, as the student ages, takes on more responsibility. Maybe a 3-year-old can introduce him or herself or just wave to the team. Maybe a 5-year-old can say what they like to do, or a 7-year-old can say their favorite class, or write it down, or put it on tape if they don't want to be there. Maybe a 9-year-old can introduce people around the table. The idea is, as time goes on, the student takes more responsibility. The student becomes what he or she is supposed to be, the equivalent of a CEO at a meeting. So we've got an IEP team that is actually working together. The student gives them information. They give the student information with the idea that they develop their goals and objectives together. That's not me talking. That's the US Department of Education. And when they work together, the idea is when that student turns 18, that student is the key component of that IEP team. And they work together and they develop their goals and objectives. And if possible, the student agrees and the student signs that IEP. In other words, the team gives the student information. The team gives the student advice and opportunities, and the student decides to sign the IEP. Doesn't that sound like supported decision-making? Doesn't that sound just like what we talked about yesterday? Isn't that a perfect example of working with family members and professionals to help make the decisions you have to make? And that's so important because like we talked yesterday, supported decision-making is a way for people to stay in control of their life without having a guardian. After all, think about why people go into guardianship in the first place. Cultural assumptions, as I told you, have led to a tripling of people in guardianship just in the last 25 years. And the majority of people going to guardianship are 18 to 25 years old. Why? Because society makes assumptions that people with disabilities can't take care of themselves in a way that society believes is appropriate. So a teacher or a counselor or a doctor or a lawyer might say, your child has intellectual and developmental disabilities. There's no way. You better get ready for a guardianship. Well, where can we learn to take care of ourselves in an appropriate manner? And that's also school. My favorite part of the special education process, and frankly, the most important part of that process, is transition services. Now, a lot of people tell me the transition services they hear about happen at the end of the IEP, and the school says, do you want to go to work or want to go to college? If you want to go to college, we're going to send you to a counselor. If you want to go to work, we're going to refer you to DARS, or vocational rehabilitation. That's not what transition services should be. On your screen is the actual law of what is supposed to be covered in transition services. Look at the bold language. Transition services are designed to help the student move from school to post-school life, including, bold letters, education, employment, and independent living. So once again, the school is obligated to work on independent living skills. And look at the bottom. Those things include the school helping the student develop post-school adult living objectives and acquisition of daily living skills. Let me ask you a question. Like I told you, that schools are the #1 referral source for guardianship. Now, let me ask you this question. What is a more important post-school adult living objective or daily living skill than making decisions? This is why I often get angry when a parent tells me the school said, next year, your student is turning 18, so you'd better be ready for guardianship. I always ask the parent to ask the school what they've been doing in transition services the whole time. Because if the school is convinced, thinks that my student needs a guardian, and thought that before, here's my question. Why weren't they working on that before making that recommendation? If there's no IEP that says, we think Jonathan isn't going to be able to make decisions and needs a guardian, I'd like to see their attempts to help me learn those skills. Where are the I statements in my IEP? Where are the goals designed to help me acquire the daily living skill of making decisions? Those are the things that schools should be doing in transition. And by federal law, they are required to do that starting at 16. In many states, it's 14. In Virginia, I know that many schools work on this before 16. So my question would be, if you're telling me to get guardianship at 18, what were you doing 2 years ago? Where was the information to help me build those skills? Because that means you've got 5 years from 16 until 21 to get transition services. Those are 5 years the school has to do all the things we saw on that slide, to build education, employment, and independent living skills, to build to post-school adult living objectives, to help the student acquire living skills, to work on employment, to build abilities, to have student-led IEPs, and to prepare that student, as the law says they must, for employment, education, and independent living. But that's not the only support available to people with disabilities, because, you know, special ed can be hard. You have to be found eligible. You have to be reevaluated every 3 years. You have to meet certain criteria. So wouldn't it be great if there was a program that could help you get all the things special education can, all of the things to help you be self-determined, and was available to all people with disabilities? You don't have to be in school. You don't have to be 18. You can be 80 and still get the same supports. Well, there is. It's called vocational rehabilitation, or VR. In Virginia, the VR program is the Department of Aging and Rehabilitative Services. So you may have heard of DARS. So I'm going to refer to DARS or VR about vocational rehabilitation. Well, the whole point of vocational rehabilitation is on your screen. It is to help students get ready to work, to help, people with disabilities work, to help them prepare to work, to get a job, to keep a job, to advance in a job, or to get a job back. So the whole point of the VR program is to make sure that people with disabilities have what they need so they can work, so they can get ready to work, so they can get work, so they can advance to their maximum ability in work, or they can get jobs back if they've lost them. There's no doubt you're asking, what does that have to do with what we talked about yesterday? Well, let me tell you this. What if the same things that you need for this, to prepare for work, to get work, to keep work, are the same things you need to live independently and avoid guardianship? What if you need the same skills? What if the things that are keeping you from working are things like self-care skills or organization skills or communication skills or interpersonal skills? What if you can't, quote unquote, take care of yourself? Wouldn't that stop you from working? Well, I will tell you, Lucy told you that I worked in Virginia for some time, still do. But when I worked in Virginia the most, I was with the Virginia Office for Protection and Advocacy, now known as the Disability Law Center for Virginia. And I highly recommend working with that agency if you can. But one of the things I did was work on their program with DARS. And time again, I would hear from DARS that these things on your screen aren't work skills. I hear it now in DC where I work with their version of DARS. What about self-care? That's an independent living skill. We don't have to provide that. So I always ask the same question in response. Would you hire somebody who has difficulty getting along with your coworkers or customers? Would you hire somebody who has difficulty communicating with you or is disorganized? Would you promote someone who's always late because they don't have the organizational skills to get there on time? Would you promote someone who has difficulty taking care of him or herself and often gets sick? Of course not. And if that is true, then those very things are work skills. If your life skills make it harder for you to work, then those are employment skills, and VR must provide services and support to help you overcome them. So the very things that might be causing you to be seen as unable to take care of yourself, if they're also causing you to have difficulty working, then DARS must provide what you need to help overcome them. That means that DARS in Virginia can do more for people with disabilities than just about any program. That's why I love the VR program. That's why I loved working with DLCV on this. It's why I love doing VR litigation when I do it now, because there's almost nothing VR can't do. And it is easy to be eligible for VR. If you're a person with disabilities and you want to work, you should be going to DARS and asking for services, because the eligibility criteria is easy. This is what you need in order to be eligible for DARS. You have to have a disability. You have to want to work. Your disability has to get harder for you to work, a barrier to employment, they call it. And VR, DARS, has to have supports that will help you get around those barriers so you can work. And here's the good news. If you're getting a public benefit like SSI or SSDI or Medicaid or a waiver, you are presumed eligible. That means that you don't have to show that you can work. They have to prove you can't. So they can't say to you, and I've litigated this with DARS, they can't say you are too disabled to work. They can't say your disability is too severe unless they give you a chance, unless they give you an opportunity called a trial work experience. I worked with a young student in Virginia. DARS refused to serve him because his IQ was measured at 40 something. So we had to go to a hearing on that. We had to litigate it. And one of the things I showed from his IEP, he had been doing volunteer work. He had been working. So we showed it's their responsibility, their obligation to show that you can't work. That's how important VR is. You can get supports and services. And once you're found eligible, remember, once you meet those 4 criteria, they give you a plan called an IPE, an individualized plan for employment. What that means is you work together with your counselor and you develop an employment goal, the thing you want to do, the job you want to get. And that plan lays out your goal and lays out what you need to get there. the supports, the services, and who's going to provide them. So now I want you to think for a second. What are some of the things that keep people with disabilities from working? When I do this with a live audience, it takes about a millionth of a second. And someone says, transportation stops you from working. Someone else says, I can't work because it might impact my benefits. Someone else says, I don't have job training, or I don't have a job coach. Well, I'm here to tell you, VR can provide all those things and has to. What you're seeing on your screen right now is a partial list of all the things that DARS, VR, must provide if people need them to work. Look very closely at some of these. One, transportation is right on that list. So if you need transportation to work, DARS has to provide it. Number two, look at these broadly. Notice what's there. There's education. There is employment services like job coaches and on-the-job training. And there are independent living skills like medical and mental health care and like services to your family members and counseling. Look at that list. Doesn't that list look a lot like the exact list for transition services where we see education, employment, and independent living? So if you're working with a student with disabilities, for example, we have two entities, the school and VR, that can provide the exact same services. Why aren't they working together? It goes even more than that, because just like we showed that the student-led IEP is supported decision-making, we know that DARS does that too, because DARS, VR, is required to make sure that every person they work with can use informed choice. The definition of informed choice is on your screen. It means that the counselor is supposed to work with the person to help the person understand his or her options, to help the person choose the job goal the person wants and the supports and services the person needs to get there. In other words, the whole job of DARS is to help the person decide the job he or she wants and the supports he or she needs by giving that person information. DARS provides information the person chooses. Doesn't that sound like supported decision-making? Isn't that just like the student-led IEP? So if you're working with a young adult with disabilities who's getting special education, who's in that transition age, you've got two agencies, school and DARS, that do the same thing and do it in the same way. Why aren't they working together? In fact, they have to work together. They often don't, but they have to. On your screen are some examples. There is a law called WIOA, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunities Act. What WIOA did was it gave VR agencies like DARS more money. And it told them, if you take this money, you have to provide more services to young adults. And we've had a law that requires DARS to become involved in special education as early as possible. I don't know if this is still going on, but when I was doing DARS work in Virginia, for a long time, they were telling parents and students, you should come to us the semester before you graduate, whether that's 18 or 21. And I used to go at them pretty hard and say, the law makes it very clear. You have to be involved as early as possible. And the semester before I graduate is not as early as possible. Why do I know that? Because the law says it. The law says that VR must attend IEP meetings if you invite them. I used to get that excuse all the time too. We can't make it. It's not an option. The law is on your screen. DARS must attend IEP meetings. So now you have two agencies that do the same things using the same methods, and they must work together. Why are we in silos? But it doesn't stop there, because that takes care of education and employment. What about independent living skills and healthcare? Well, if you are receiving a Medicaid waiver or services through Medicaid or Medicare or working with a center for independent living, you have no doubt heard the phrase person-centered planning. And person-centered planning agencies have to provide certain services. That's on your screen coming directly from the federal government. Take a look at the things person-centered planning agencies have to do. They must provide education services, independent living services like community participation in healthcare and wellness. They must provide employment services. Doesn't that look just like what VR has to provide? And doesn't that look just like what schools have to provide? So just for one example, if you're working with a young adult with disabilities, you have 3 entities that do the same thing. If you're working with an adult, you have 2, all that do the same things. And you know what? They do them in the same way too. Because if you've worked with a person-centered planning agency, whether again, a CSB, Community Services Board, a Center for Independent Living, or any other planning agency, you've gone through your person-centered planning process. And if they've talked to you, they've told you that the whole point of person-centered planning is to find out what's important to you and what's important for you. Find out where you are now and where you want to go. What kind of services and supports do you want in your life? What do you want to change? What do you need to stay the same? And then they're supposed to give you information and opportunities to choose goals, objectives, and supports and services to get there. In other words, the agency, the SIL, the CSB, whoever you're working with, is supposed to give you information and opportunities so you can choose your goals, your objectives, your supports, and your services. They give information, you choose. Doesn't that sound just like supported decision-making? Doesn't it sound just like the student-led IEP? Doesn't it sound just like informed choice in Voc Rehab? Of course it does. These agencies are doing the same things in the same way. Why are they in silos? Why are they wasting time and their own money not collaborating with each other? And money is the final frontier, I think, for people with disabilities, especially if you're getting benefits like Medicare, Medicaid, or a waiver. Because here's what we know, and it's a sad fact, is that if you're getting public benefits, it's really hard to have any kind of life. Because if you're on Medicare, if you're on Medicaid, you know this already. You're not supposed to have more than $2,000 worth of stuff, worth of countable assets, they call it. If you have more than $2,000, you risk losing your benefits. So the very things that you need to live in the community, you can lose if you have too much money. So what happens is people with disabilities may live in the community, but they can't have any kind of life. They can't work, they can't do things because they have to stay under what we call the fiscal cliff. So we need to find a way to make that work for people, and there is. If you haven't heard about it, it's called the ABLE Act. ABLE stands for Achieving a Better Life Experience. ABLE is a way for people with disabilities to earn, save, and spend money just like everyone else. Here's how it works. There's a part of the law called a 529. It lets you set up a plan, and you can learn all about this by going to a website called ablenrc.org. It's on your screen. It stands for Able National Resource Center.org. But if you open an ABLE account, you can put, or people can put in there for you, up to $15,000 or more, depending upon the state, per year. And that money grows tax-free. And it does not impact your benefits. It gets you past that $2,000 fiscal cliff. In fact, you can have as much as $101,000, $101,999. When you get to $102,000 in your account, your SSI benefits will be suspended, but you still receive Medicaid. In other words, ABLE lets you save money and live the way you want to live, like everyone else in the community. It lets you work and while keeping your benefits. This is the way I look at ABLE. And I've known people who have followed this path. I knew a young woman, she got a job, she was on benefits, she was afraid to work because like everyone else, she had been told if you have more than $2,000, you lose your benefits. But what she did was she got a job making minimum wage at a hospital and she opened an ABLE account. And she put money from her ABLE account into getting more job training. She earned money, she earned went into an ABLE account. She took some money out of the ABLE account. She paid for job training. You know what that led to? Her getting a better job, making more money. So she put more money into her ABLE account and took some out to increase her education, which led to her getting a better job. That young woman is now working full-time at a job with benefits and can now make enough money that she doesn't need Medicaid or SSI. She worked her way out of a lifetime of poverty. And that's what experts have called public benefits, a life sentence of poverty, because you can't have $2,000. Well, with ABLE, you can. You can have up to $102,000 in your account at $15,000 a year to do just about anything with. Essentially, if you can spend money on it, ABLE covers it. I've yet to find something that you can ABLE account money for. The whole idea is to give people the same life as everyone else. And here's a great thing also. Unlike a special trust that you might have heard of, when a person has an ABLE account, that person decides how he or she saves the money or spends the money. That person can also identify other people to help. I can say, I want my mother, my brother, my sister, my wife to have access to my account to help me balance my budget, to help me decide what to spend money on, so that as I'm making the decisions of what to do with my money, I'm getting advice and assistance from people I trust. Doesn't that sound like supported decision making? So I hope I have shown you that supported decision making, pardon me. I hope I've shown you that supported decision making can go all through life, from pre-K at age 3, going to an IEP meeting and talking about self-determination, all the way through work, all the way through healthcare, all the way through managing money. And if you think about it, end of life planning, like sometimes we call it 5 wishes, or making choices or making plans, that's an exercise in supported decision making too. So instead of all of these separate plans, why aren't we bringing it all together? Why aren't we working with a person to find out what the person wants, what the person's goals are in areas of life? What are things that you feel you need? And then ask, who can help me get there? What agencies? We've just seen there are a bunch. If I'm looking for education, employment, independent living, financial services, benefits management, all of what we talked about. And then get them together. Write up your plans. And yes, I know that different agencies have different plans. There still has to be an IEP. There still has to be an ISP and an IPE. But we can pull them together. We can get the representatives in the same room, talking the same language, having one meeting instead of separate meetings, to create a coordinated support plan where we discuss what I want, my goals, my objectives, and who is going to help me get there. And this is not just a hippie trippy dream. It's happening. In fact, it has happened. We know study after study has shown that when this happens, when students, for example, are given this kind of coordination, they do better. One project called Project Renew gave students access to coordinating supports around things like education, employment, independent living. And these were the quote unquote worst of the worst students, the ones that were the most likely to drop out. Within 1 year, 93% of them were working. 2 years after they finished the program, 95% either were done with high school or were almost done. 3/4 of them were in college. Why? Because the whole point of these programs is to help people make their own decisions. When we are making our own decisions, when we are getting support to do that, we have more self-determination. And when we have more self-determination, we have a better life. And I know it's happening because I've seen it happen. I have 2 pilot projects going on in Ohio, specifically to do exactly what we talked about in counties known as Perry and Pickaway. One of them is already done. We had comments from a parent that said, I never knew my daughter wanted to work at Starbucks. She's working at Starbucks. From a teacher saying students were never involved in IEP meetings before. Now they are, and now we know what they want. From case managers saying we had tears in our eyes when students spoke up for the first time, and we worked together to make things happen. And it happened in a project in Vermont where we got a high school, their version of DARS, and a Medicaid waiver provider together. And they had one meeting with their students, and they developed their plans together with their students. Well, we did that project for a year. And after a year, we simply asked people how it went. We did a survey. We asked students how they thought it went. We asked the parents. We asked the teachers and the counselors and the professionals. Here's what we found. 100% said it improved the supports the students got. 100% said it provided better supports to meet student needs. 100% said it helped identify needs better. 73% said it was an easier process. 93% said the program increased the supports students received. So imagine that. By working together, by coordinating, by collaborating, by communicating, by doing the very things we are supposed to do, by doing what the law already requires, services and supports got better. And what is the connector between all of this? Supported decision-making. Helping the person, whether it be a student or an adult, make his or her own choices, choose the programs and supports that he or she wants, putting the control where it's supposed to be, putting the person in the center. Great things happen. So I say to you at the end of this conference, this is our goal. This is what we should be looking for. The independence we all want, the self-determination we all deserve. But it's only going to happen if we start with a firm respect and commitment to everyone's right to make choices. If we break, and we insist that we break 1,500 years of culture that says people with disabilities can't do things, that has teachers saying you must get guardians, that has lawyers and accountants and doctors saying they can't live independently. We start with can, we start with must, and we start with the supports and services people need. And yes, I know if you do this, because I've had it happen to me, if you leave here today, if you go back to your schools and your counselors and your teachers and you say, these are the things that we should do, you're going to get pushback. You're going to be told, like I've been told in every state I go to, something like, you're trying to change the way we've always done things, or you're trying to fundamentally alter our process. And when they say that, and they will, if they say, we don't do it this way, we've always done it that way, you're asking us to change. Answer it the way I do. Yes, yes, I am. You know what? Everything that's ever helped anyone, anywhere, anything that's ever fundamentally changed anything has changed the way things have always been. And that's a good thing. Think about it. In 1775, the 13 American colonies had always been the property of Great Britain. We changed that. In 1863, right here where I'm sitting in Virginia and where you're listening, some people could own other people. We changed that. In 1918, half the population, women, weren't allowed to vote. We changed that. In 1989, people with disabilities were not considered in a legal sense to be people with the same rights as people. We changed that. Everything we've ever done changed the way things have always been. But you're going to get pushback because change is hard. I told you, this society, this culture has been on 15 years. And when that happens, you get pushback. Culture pushes back because when people are given the power to make decisions, you know what's going to happen? Sometimes they're going to make bad ones. And they're going to make mistakes. They're going to do things that you don't think they should have done. And then there'll be pushback. Someone will tell you that's just wrong. We just did guardianship. That bad thing never would have happened. Well, that's when you have to be ready to push right back. Because I will tell you, the things that you're being asked to do, the things I am challenging you to do are not easy. Change in culture is not easy. But whoever told you it's going to be easy? If you're a parent, that's hard. If you're a person with disabilities, with the whole world telling you you can't do things, that's hard. If you're a professional with a commitment to lifting up people rather than holding them down, that's hard. But man, we weren't promised it would be easy. There's a quote on your screen from my favorite author, and he says it right. The purpose of life is not ease. We weren't promised ease. The purpose of life is to choose and to act upon our choices. And if we do that, if we empower choice, if we respect choice, if we protect choice, if we promote choice, then we're not going to be judged on a mistake. None of us are judged on a bad choice we make. In fact, bad choices help us be the people we are. They help us choose to be the people we want to do. The mistakes we make build us. So when we respect and protect, when we demand choice, you're not judged on your mistakes. You'll be measured on 3 things and 3 things only: your daring, your effort, and your resolve. Those are the 3 things we need to change culture. We got to be bold, we've got to work hard, and you got to be ready to get up every time you get knocked down. Because if you know this as well as I do, they're trying to knock you down. And you have got to get up and say, I'm not staying down. We're going to change things, even though it's not easy. And if we do that, then we do change the world. And that's where I want to leave you with today. The last thing, a cliche about changing the world. Because changing the world is what we're here for. And changing the world is what we can do. Because if you empower one person to make his or her own decisions, to be self-determined, you've changed that person's world, but you've also changed the world of every single person who comes after that person. Jenny Hatch, who I told you about yesterday, her case took a year and 6 days of trial and a huge fight. The people who've come after her have not had as hard a fight because she made the original fight. The next case I had took a day for Ryan King in DC. I've had other cases that didn't even go to trial. They just agreed because it made sense, because Jenny Hatch paved the way, because we had changed the world, because she changed her world. So when you do that, everything changes. One person making one choice at a time, everything changes. That's my hope. You know, we've been talking about supported decision-making. I'm gonna let you a little secret. I don't like that phrase. I hate that phrase, supported decision-making, because it sounds like a program or something just for people with disabilities, or I'm gonna do supported decision-making. No, it's what we already do. It's decision-making. That should be the way we change the world, is that our culture goes from saying that people with disabilities can't do things to saying that we all give and get help every day. We all need help every day. We all make decisions and we all shape our lives regardless of our capabilities. That's our calling to change the world. And if you buy into what I've told you over the last 2 days, my hope is that you're going to leave here today and you are going to change somebody's world. But if you don't buy into what I say, then frankly, I hope you die suddenly. And that's not a joke. Because unless you are lucky enough to die suddenly, you know what you're going to be one day? You are going to be old, or you're going to be considered to be infirm or in need. You are going to be in the system. What kind of system do you want to be in? Do you want to be in one that respects you and protects your right to make choices? One that says you get to choose your own path? Or do you want to be in a system that for 1,500 years has said you have a limitation in doing something, therefore you're not going to get to do anything? I think I know which one you want. And if you do want it, we can change the world. One person, one choice. The culture can change, and it would be my great honor to change it with you. That is my email address on the screen. I know we have a few minutes left. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Jonathan. You left us with some really powerful information and a powerful challenge. I think based on what we're seeing in the chat, um, your reference and talk about silos is so very important, and people would really like to have a system that you're talking about rather than all these meetings and people talking around them rather than with them. We've got a couple questions. One of them is, if a student is in the transition age, whose responsibility is it to contact DARS and invite them to IEP meetings?
Anybody's. Here's the thing. Yes, the school can, and frankly, the school should, but I don't trust the schools to do it. I don't. There have been too many times where I've been involved with students of transition age who've had no contact with DARS. I would find out what age your school begins transition planning, 14, 15, 16. And as soon as my student hit that age, I would contact DARS. I would ask DARS for an intake, and I would invite DARS to every IEP meeting. And if they've got a problem with that, I've got some law for you. Okay? The law is very clear that VR is supposed to work with students and is required to come to IEP meetings.
Okay. So you mentioned that you come across people who never had access to DARS, and let's say they're out of the school age. I want to make sure everybody knows that people can contact DARS and request services pretty much at any age, but what we hear so often is there's a waiting list, or we don't have money to provide that service or that support that you need.
So this is a longer answer that I'm going to put very condensed. DARS is allowed to do what is called an order of selection if the federal government lets them. In an order of selection, DARS does not create a waiting list, but they create categories based upon the severity of a person's disability. If they are running out of money, they can ask the feds to close a category and only serve the most severe people with disabilities. That should not stop you from applying for services, because once a category gets open, and they often are at the beginning of the fiscal year, you're right there. And they are required to provide certain services even for people when they're on an order of selection. And if you are a student, they are required to provide services whether or not they're on an order of selection. Again, it's right there in the law. And if they have, and it happens a lot with VR. I've done VR around the country, and often either they haven't read it, or there's institutional belief they don't have to do certain things. But with regard to the we don't have money, if you have an IPE, if you've been found eligible and you have an individualized plan for employment, they're not allowed to say they can't afford a particular service. If you need a service and that service is appropriate for you, they're not allowed to raise a defense if they don't have the budget. And again, I'm telling you this with over 10 years of running that program in Virginia and doing it in DC and around the country. VR can do more things in more ways than you can imagine. I'm a huge fan of working with VR and making sure VR does what it's supposed to do.
Okay, good to hear. One of our attendees said, I'm very glad you're covering how DARS should work. I've seen too many times of this not happening in an effective manner. And I think many of us have experienced that.
And my advice is don't give up. See, here's my thing, and I'm not talking about DARS now. I'm talking as a general matter, because I hear this in just about every state. I hear, I don't go to VR because they don't do anything. They don't do what they're supposed to do. So why should I bother? If you do that, they win. They never have to do what they're supposed to do. What you need to do is advocate, or find an advocate, or work to make them do what they're supposed to do. I don't doubt for a second that a VR agency, whether DARS or any other, is not doing what it's supposed to do. That is the reason we have to push And again, in Virginia, I strongly recommend the Disability Law Center of Virginia, or you can email me. My email is on the screen, and I can try to either give you some advice or find a way to help you. But with VR, that is a huge thing. There are things they have to do, and we can't let them either intentionally or mistakenly get away with not doing them. The rights at stake are too important. The fundamental right to have opportunities for education, employment, independent living, the life like everyone else, is too important to let that go by.
Thank you. There's a question about the ABLE accounts. When the person who has the ABLE account dies, and if there's money left in their account, where does that money go?
Yeah, the law under ABLE is this, is that because you're being allowed to have all that money, there's a deal we make. So if you die with money in your ABLE account, that money is used to pay back Medicaid for any supports and services you might have gotten in your life. Now, a lot of people go, then why should I get it? And I say, of course you should get it. Because the supports and services you're getting through Medicaid are really expensive. You're coming out way ahead on this deal. You know, you're coming out way ahead by being able to have more than $2,000 to your name, to work, to take vacations, to buy a car, to get your own apartment. To me, that's worth the small chance that if I die, money gets kicked back to the feds. You know, I'd rather be getting the supports and services that are real expensive for free or just for my copay, while at the same time being able to have all that money so that when I die, if I've got whatever left, Medicaid can have it. I'm not using it at that point. So to me, that is a reason to have an ABLE account, not to not get one.
Okay, thank you. There's a couple questions about guardianship, and one of them is if a parent has guardianship for an adult and the adult gets in some legal trouble, are the parents liable?
Not generally. And this is one where it's probably better to talk to more of a specialist, but I'm pretty sure Virginia's laws say that the guardian isn't responsible for the actions of the ward, is what it's called. But I'm not speaking gospel on that one, but I'm pretty sure that's the case.
Okay, thank you. There was a comment yesterday during your session about someone said they had gotten guardianship for their child when the child was 13 years old. I didn't even know if that was done, but it leads into the next question. Is guardianship required to be revisited routinely? We have a very capable adult who could have self-determination, but whose parent perplexingly has full guardianship. Can a review be requested?
Lots to go through there. Guardianship is kind of a misnomer. If you're under 18, your parent is your guardian. That's just the way parenthood works. Some states, I'm not sure if Virginia is one, allow there to be a pre-18 setup to lead into guardianship after 18. I'm never in favor of things like that because that's kind of predetermining what a person can do in their lives. Now, to the question of someone who's capable in revisions, the guardian is supposed to file a report with the court every year and is supposed to say, among other things, what they're doing to help that person become more self-determined. In practice, I can tell you that courts very rarely read them. But what I can tell you is this. If you're a provider, and it sounds like there's a provider speaking here, you can submit a letter to the court. You can submit a comment. You can submit that and just say, this is what I think should be reviewed, because the court on its own is supposed to be able to say whether or not, this person might not need a guardian. There have been cases where a court has brought guardians back into court to say, I want to review whether this person needs a guardian at all. So information that you as a provider may be able to provide the court could be helpful, or you can talk to the parent about whether this is an appropriate thing to do. You know, the Virginia law is really clear. The guardian is supposed to be maximizing the person's opportunities to make decisions. The way I put it is, even after guardianship, self-determination is a thing. Supported decision-making is a thing. And if a guardian does his or her job and helps a person make more decisions and the person gets it, then a good guardian says to the court, good news, judge, I did my job. Now you can fire me. And if guardianship worked that way, I'd be a huge fan, because I know there are 18-year-olds out there that aren't ready to make their own decisions. God knows I was one of them. But there might be a person with a disability at 18 who's really close to getting it, but just needs a little more support. Wouldn't a great thing be to have a time-limited guardianship, 1 or 2 years, and then revisit it? I've had cases like that where I've asked the court to make a time-limited guardianship. Jenny Hatch was a time-limited guardianship after her case, 1 year. It's over. She's independent. So those are all options you can think about as you're working with people as they come to, age. And to the questioner, yes, my recommendation is talk to the parent about that and or submit something to the court.
If you submit something to the court, is that public record?
Generally, guardianship files are held private, but I would, again, like with the other one, I'm not speaking gospel on that one. You should probably ask the court clerk.
Oh, good. Thank you. Okay, we have a question from Mahaya. She's asking, what services can I get from DARS? Jonathan, I think you had that on one of your slides, and if you can locate that, fine.
I will. Actually, that slide is not even determinative. There's more. Okay, what I'm going to show you is some of the things that DARS can provide. This is in the law again, remember. So if you Google 34 CFR 361.48, it's the bottom of your screen. That is a big, long regulation that talks about all of the things Evoke Rehab, DARS, has to do. That's the section where you'll see that they have to come to IEP meetings. That's the section where you'll see that they have to provide services to students. There's another section that talks about all of the things they have to do if it will help someone work. This slide up there is not all of them. There's others. And in fact, the last one in the list is anything else a person needs to achieve an outcome. I have, when I was in Virginia, we were working in the program, DARS paid for dentistry. DARS paid for temporary rent because it's hard to get a job with no fixed address. DARS paid in one case for clothing because it's hard to get a job if you don't have an interview suit. If you can establish that there's something that's stopping you from working, this thing is in the way of me working, and that DARS, by doing something, can help me get around that problem, they can do it. It's hard for me to think of anything. The one thing I can think of that DARS might not have to do is make alterations to your house, like put a ramp in. But they have made alterations to cars. They have certainly paid for cars to be accessible because that helps you get to and from work. So it's hard for me to think of what they can't do, with the exception possibly of what's called environmental modifications. But you can't get it if you don't ask. But what you have to say is, I need this to work. I'm not getting it. Can you help me get it?
I think one thing that often people don't know, and you've got it right there on your slide, is that it will pay for post-high school education. If you want to go to college and you qualify, that can be obtained through DARS. I know a couple people who have done that.
Absolutely, and that can be tricky, but yes, they can pay for it. If they agree to support you to get a job, and that job requires college, you have a real good argument. I'll give you a great example. A person I used to work with, she was working with the Alabama version of DARS, and she wanted to be an attorney. And that VR said, well, how about paralegal? And she said, no, I have the ability to be an attorney. And she showed them. I have the opportunity to be an attorney. I need law school covered. They covered law school. And that education expenses includes books. I litigated a case in DC where they had to cover not only the school, not only the books, but room and board. Is that a promise it'll happen every time? No. You still have to show that that college is directly related to you getting that job.
Okay, thank you for all that information. If anyone has other questions, we've got a few more minutes. You can put them in the chat box. There are some questions about people have specific guardianship issues that they want help with, and Jonathan very generously is available for you to contact him, and he can assist you in whatever way might be possible. Is that
I'm always happy to speak with anyone. Again, my email is on your screen. I'm never going to promise. I don't have a magic wand. I can't promise I can do everything or anything. But what I can promise I can do is talk to you. And if I can't help you, try to help you find someone who can.
You'll also notice, thank you for that, Jonathan. This is Tanya jumping in, sorry, that I've put a poll up on I have a couple of these. So if you are a person who has a developmental disability, if you will check the boxes that are in this particular poll, and you can check more than one item, it asks several things about you. So if you'll take a moment and do that. I'm just sort of watching before I close it. And I have another question for you, a couple more. Okay. And if you have questions to cover, Lucy, if there are other comments, this can roll while y'all are doing that. I just wanted to be able to say it. I'm going to end it for this, and then I'm going to ask again people with disabilities if you can tell us about your satisfaction, and then I'm going to do the exact same thing for families. So go ahead.
Reed has a question about DARS paying for college if you're on SAP. I don't know what SAP is. Maybe you do, Jonathan.
I don't.
Okay. And then someone is highly recommending a benefits analysis from DARS. This greatly helped me understand my benefits in a more comprehensive way. So.
Well, totally. Now, benefits analysis or benefits planning is covered by DARS. Remember I told you that you're not supposed to have more than $2,000 in assets unless you have an ABLE account. There's other ways, though, that you can earn money but get what are called offsets. Like there's a thing called an employment-related work expense, things that cost you money so that you have to work. Sometimes transportation costs money. And that is something that can offset money that you make. The worst thing that can happen to you is for you to get a letter from SSA, Social Security Administration, that says, we paid you too much benefits. You have to pay us back. And it happens all the time. All the time. I've seen people get letters from SSA that said over the last 10 years, we've paid you $100,000 too much. Send us that money back. Now, if you work with a benefits counselor, DARS has that available, they can help you keep track of what you've made and what your expenses are to reduce the chance you get a letter like that, and if you do, so that you can defend yourself. And again, I'm going to recommend the Disability Law Center of Virginia. There's someone there who I used to work with, who I think the world of, named Julie Triplett, who used to give an amazing presentation on things like benefits counseling. And in the past, at least when I was there, we used to handle cases like that, where someone was charged to tell the SSA said, pay us back. So benefits counseling is hugely important. You can look through it, into it with DARS. And if you're working, I highly recommend you do.
Very good.
To address the one person who asked about college being paid for? Again, it can be. It's often tricky. If you're going to ask Voc Rehab to pay for college, you've got to show it's directly related to working. A lot of people now are trying to get, there are independent living programs at college that are great, but Voc Rehab agencies across the country are refusing to pay for them unless you can show that they are related to working. So that's going to be your key about getting college paid for, is that it be related to working. I highly recommend you ask DARS what their policy is on that. I am currently in heavy duty litigation against the DC version of DARS on exactly that issue.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you everyone for your feedback through the polls. Jonathan, this was another wonderful session, so thank you so much. We appreciate that. And this was officially our last live session, and we had a great turnout. So that was wonderful. Thank you, everybody. You will get another email from me that reminds you of the dance tonight. The dance party can be accessed from the convention website, and you will also be able to see any sessions that you were not able to see when they were live. They will be in the on-demand library. I hope to have them all there by tomorrow. I keep adding. They take a little time because of their size. But you'll be able to watch those for the next 2 weeks. The convention website will stay there. And you also have 2 movies. If you haven't watched Crip Camp and The Reason I Jumped, those are on the convention website. Highly recommend them. So excited to see you all later, and thank you very much. Thank you for coming. Thanks to our interpreters and Jonathan. Have a great rest of the day, everybody. See you tonight.